All right, everybody. Welcome back to Brunch with Brooke and Bryn.
Season 2.
We made it.
First episode.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Kind of a big deal.
Uh-huh.
It's still so surreal to me that we are doing this and we already have a season done under our belt, and now we're starting a new adventure with a second season.
Doing 1 season is cool. Doing 2 seasons is really cool.
Mm-hmm. We're feeling really cool right now. So, how are you doing, Bryn?
I'm doing good.
Hmm.
I leave for Italy tomorrow.
Wow. We have here a cultured person. Wow. An adventurous individual. That's so fun. What are you going to do in Italy?
We're doing like a Mediterranean cruise. So, yeah, it's, I kind of accidentally got invited to it, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm going. So,
Okay.
with my husband, that'll be fun. And I'll be back before the season comes out. So,
Wow. Man.
How are you doing, Brooke?
I've been better. Right now I'm feeling excited and happy to be here with you and to talk about this new season and our episode, and just the stress of graduate school and different things there, and yeah, just still working on figuring out who I am and all the fun stuff. So
You're 20.
wee. So good luck, friend. If you can relate to that, makes 2 of us. Yeah. So some rough emotional things, and overall I'm okay right now in this moment, and that's enough for me.
That's good. And speaking of emotions.
Oh, are we gonna tell him?
No. First, let's introduce our season.
You thought we were gonna let you know. It's gonna be the surprise at the end of the housekeeping stuff.
Right. Though if you've read the episode title, you already know what we're talking about. It's fine.
Darn. Whoops.
This is the first episode of our 2nd season, which is really exciting. We came out with our trailer last week. A few housekeeping things. We still have our Patreon and our Venmo. So if you want to support the show monetarily, we love that. And if you want to support us through spreading the word, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have a YouTube. Sharing things you like, all of that we super appreciate. And a little update on our Patreon. We're creating bonus content, but we don't have a ton of people on our Patreon yet, and we were like, this really doesn't make sense to put all this time into it and then not be getting a lot back.
Like it was tricky because we were spending more time planning and also actually recording extra content, and it was fun. I love doing that with you, and really, really useful information. So if y'all do get a chance, look at it, and we hope it's helpful. And it wasn't really,
it didn't make sense right now, and I think eventually we'll start doing it again. If you want to support and want a way to support long term, then that's a way to do it. And we may still release some bonus content on there when we happen to have extra stuff. So,
because it is fun and there's cool stuff, that we did, and that's just for right now. We're gonna put that on pause. So.
Yeah, and we're not doing. We used to do videos, but we're changing how we do them, so we're not actually recording the podcast anymore. So instead of being at our cute little table, we're sitting. Not on the couch, but leaning against the couch, covered in blankets, and I'd say it's an improvement. It's pretty cozy.
I feel very happy. Like, all I need is a book, and then I'm just content and I can stay here for hours. Do I have the time to do that? No, but It's a dream.
One day.
So Joan's table is still here. We're just giving her a bit of a break, and we're switching things up this season.
We're simplifying the podcast, doing the essentials so we can focus more on the important things.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else that we need to cover that you want?
No.
People to know? Okay, we're good.
We're done.
Sweet.
See you next week.
All right, bye. We wish you well on the journey to completeness. Bye. Okay, so are we good to dive in?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I am so excited. When we started talking about this podcast idea, this episode idea, I felt so excited because we'll be talking about how to rethink emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are emotions? What do they mean? How can we understand ourselves better through emotions? Because I feel like growing up, and we were talking about this before we started recording, growing up, not many people or places talked about emotions. Like, what does it mean to feel this way? And what do you do with that? And here are tools for you. It was just, oh yeah, you sit down, watch movies, or you read books, and you're like, oh, this person's really mad or super sad, or, you know, XYZ. And I feel like I got a lot from my mom about emotions and emotional regulation and stuff, but she's a therapist, so
a little unusual.
Yeah.
And I think your childhood education in that shows. But yeah, like you were saying, like most of us, I think, get very little, if any, education. Like I think in school we maybe talked about emotions like a few times, but like I don't remember any of it, and I don't remember it being helpful necessarily. In my home growing up, I got basically no emotional education either, probably because my parents didn't either, and it just all gets passed on, you know.
Generational theme. It's interesting how that works. Yeah.
And so we have this problem that like so many of us are financially independent and we have jobs and like we can take care of ourselves in so many ways, but then when it comes to emotions, it's like I need a therapist to navigate my emotions because I don't know how to do it myself. And therapy's great. Right, Brooke?
Yeah.
And I think it's a problem that I think most of us could benefit from going to therapy and getting some emotion coaching. And
I like that. Emotion coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it would be good if more of us were emotionally independent and could navigate our feelings ourselves. And once again, therapy is great, but like, what if we just taught that to everyone and so we didn't have to go to therapy to learn? What if we were learning that in school and from our parents so we didn't have to learn it as adults, right?
Yeah. And well, at least the and piece is important to me, right? And something that I've seen here is people oftentimes don't get shown or taught that their feelings are okay, or at least how to even tap in and identify what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And also that can depend on safety. Like I know from personal experience from something that happened this week in my life, when I'm not with people I don't feel safe with, I don't want to share my emotions and my feelings, because that's really vulnerable and kind of scary. And if I throw stuff out there that's hard for me and I don't think I'm going to get the support I need or the compassion, like I'm not going to do it. And I think that's a very real thing we all experience. So coming to back what you were saying with emotions, how amazing would it be if everybody had the tools to hold space for themselves and like process their emotions and just, little by little or in big ways heal and understand what those emotions are telling them.
Yeah, that'd be amazing, because we are all surrounded. We always have emotions, right? Like there's not a time where you're emotionless, right? You always have something going on. And so But sometimes emotions show up stronger than other times, right?
There can be different reasons for that, whether that's like raw spots that we have or insecurities or lack of sleep. I've seen that for me.
Yeah, so everyone has emotions in their life, but we haven't really been taught how to deal with them, which is a problem. And a lot of parenting nowadays is starting to focus more on emotions, but I've seen some problems with it. Like I know that gentle parenting is pretty emotion focused. Even if you don't gentle parent, there's ways you can be emotion focused. Anyway, there's a lot of parenting focuses more on emotions, which I think is great, but I'm not always, and different people may do this better and some may do it worse. So yes, I think we have a problem that I often see. Parents teach their child to identify their emotions. It's like, oh, what are you feeling right now? What's going on? Oh, are you feeling angry right now? Which is great because a lot of people cannot even identify their emotions.
Or give themselves the time to do so. Like yesterday when I had some hard stuff happen, I was driving to work to go give therapy to people. And I was in my car, and as I just sat there before driving, I felt this big need to cry. Like there were a lot of emotions coming up for me, and I've learned that for me, crying can be really healing and just letting myself feel what I need to feel. Yeah. And that's our encouragement. Feel what you need to feel. And give yourself that space, that permission to just sit with it. Yeah. That can be really healing in and of itself. Yeah. And if nobody else is showing up for you and your feelings, you can at least show up for yours.
Yeah. I like that.
As soon as I started driving to work, though, I was like, oh, I'm focusing on not crashing. Right. and you know, thinking about my clients and how to support them and all this stuff. And in the background, I could still feel that need to cry. But because I wasn't slowing down, I was just pushing it aside.
Right. You don't always have the time and space to do that.
Yeah.
So you have to come back and revisit it later.
Which I did. And I had a good cry for about an hour. So.
and then, like you were saying, you need the space to feel your emotions. A lot of parents I've seen will be like, okay, let's identify your emotion. And then they'll be like, it's okay to feel that. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry or whatever it is. Which is really good to validate that, but then they never teach their child what to do with their emotions. They just say, oh, it's fine to feel those. But I'm just not convinced that we're getting to a better place than we were before. Because you either end up with parents that don't give you any emotion coaching, and then you don't know how to identify your emotions or what to do with them. Or you end up being able to identify them, but also not knowing what to do with them. And I'm not sure either of those are, maybe one's in a slightly better place, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's tricky because whether it's with parenting or with school or just as you're doing your life stuff, be able to identify emotions, understand where they're coming from, understand what's underneath that emotion. Like, is it a value? Is it a goal? Have you been mistreated? Do you feel lonely? Be curious about your experience and about your emotions. Secondly, what do you want to do with that? I really like that. And then it's kind of moving it into the behavior piece of, I might be really, really mad at my brothers, but I'm not going to go do something mean to them out of spite. Right. You know, how can we be intentional and create peace of mind as well as safety for ourselves and others as we move forward, acknowledging our emotions? I think that's kind of the place I get to.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a healthy way to look at it. I think with how a lot of kids are being raised right now, it's like you learn how to identify them, but then you're not really taught what to do with them. And a lot of times if you're taught like what to do with anger, it's like, oh, well, it's okay to feel what you're feeling, which I think I'm a little concerned that will turn into Well, because they're not being taught what to do with them after that. So it's like, oh, I'm angry, so it's okay for me to be angry. And so I don't have to be responsible for this feeling. And it's like, no, that feeling's not a choice, but also you are responsible with your actions associated with it. And I'm worried that that connection won't be made. That it's like, your feelings are valid and you're responsible for your actions associated with your feelings. I'm worried that those won't connect for kids.
Oh, yeah. Up. I really like how you...
Yeah.
I love how you worded that. And that makes it really clear in my mind of, yeah, they're the emotions and identifying and the connection of you're responsible for your actions.
Yes.
And a lot of times hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're hurt and in pain and some really awful things have happened to you, that doesn't give us the permission to harm others.
Right. Like, your feelings are valid. Like, it's okay that you
100%.
Feel hurt, but that doesn't mean you should go hurt other people. And I'm worried with how the parenting I see that connection won't be made. And a lot of the time what's taught is like, okay, so you need to do something with this anger, go stomp or hit a pillow, which is catharsis, right? Releasing an emotion by doing something like that.
Help,
yeah, and there's lots of research that's like, this does not actually help. And the problem is...
tends to build it, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you're not actually addressing the anger. You're not addressing the problem. You're just saying, oh, you have that anger, go punch a pillow, instead of using your anger to fuel you to fix the problem. And also there's lots of problems with that, because it's like, oh, you're feeling angry, you should hit something to feel better, which can turn into some problematic behaviors, some really bad behaviors.
We both made a face. We were like, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like that's kind of how parenting is working right now, and some people do it better, right? There's some people that I think handle it well, and I see it not being handled well by lots of people, and I'm wondering what's going to happen. And so we have this episode.
Oh yeah.
To talk about dealing with emotions better. We're actually in this one, so our whole season is on emotion, right? And we're gonna go through specific emotions, more of that about that's in our trailer. But today, this episode is just gonna be on rethinking emotions. So we have 5 points on ways that we can rethink emotions to view them in a more healthy, holistic way so that we can deal with them better.
So what we're hoping to do is just to have a conversation with y'all. It's focused on emotions and just honoring that. And we're gonna try and shift some perspectives on it and offer this hopeful call to action in a way.
Yeah.
Of have a big heart for yourself. Your emotions are trying to tell you something. They're sources of information.
Yes.
And if we're constantly just shoving it down, at some point in time, it's going to explode. Your emotions are going to come out. Whether that's you giving it all to a safe person in your life and they're just caught completely off guard. Like I've done that before. Like bless my husband's heart. Like that's happened a couple times. And then I feel awful. And then I'm in this place of, I am so sorry. You don't deserve that. And I didn't mean to, blow all over you. And that wasn't personal to you. And then, we repair it and we work through it and stuff. And I think that's another key thing of we need to be able to recognize how we're showing up in our relationships with other people and what baggage or raw spots we're carrying into those interactions. Because everything could be fine in one moment, but then we have an old hurt pop up and then we're really sensitive, and then we become defensive or protective, and then we just kind of go into this dance of, I don't want to get hurt, so I'm just gonna, move away or whatever, right? It's really important to be able to slow down. It's also important to recognize that a lot of times what people do, what people say, or what they don't do and say, it's not personal to you. A lot of times it just shows where the other person is at.
Yeah.
And that they're working on themselves.
And it may still hurt you even if it's not personal to you, but you kind of have to hold the both. Like, they weren't I should try not to hold a grudge against them, and this tells me some things I may need to navigate in my life. It shows me some pain points.
Yeah, way to grow.
Well, before we get into this, I got a lot of these ideas from this book called The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren, and it is brilliant. Like, has so many awesome ideas on emotions that I think are so healthy. And this book has a few things that I don't agree with as much and are maybe a little more problematic. And so if you really like the content in this episode, not all of it's from her, but a decent amount is. If you really like the content, I would recommend reading the book, but in the show notes, I'm going to put my favorite chapters from it. So just a warning. And this is another thing we wanted to talk about, just the fact that a lot of emotion stuff is kind of a philosophy. It's like, it's been interesting as Brooke and I have both taken our psychology backgrounds into this and examined it and been like, there are a lot of different theories of emotions that all say different things, and they all have something useful to bring to the table. But I don't know if all of them have the whole truth. And a lot of it's kind of hard to it's hard to do research in this area to an extent, because it's like, how do we categorize emotions? What are there just needs
it depends on the culture and the personality and the system.
There's so much to it, and so this is a really complex area that I think needs a lot more research and a lot more thinking in. Especially I feel like it's only been the past few decades that we've really seen emotions for what they are, right? So Brooke and I had lots of interesting discussions.
I've had a lot of fun with it too.
It was interesting to examine what we were taught in classes versus what we found in our personal life versus what I found in this book. And so we just want to go into this knowing that this is kind of our philosophy and what we found to be most true, but there's lots of other emotion theories, but we really like this one.
Yeah. To that point, and I just want to share from the therapy side of things. Here's what I see, and take it with a grain of salt, because remember, I'm a baby therapist. I'm a second year marriage and family therapy graduate student and not licensed yet, working under an actually licensed therapist license. So wordy, I apologize. This is just what I have seen as I've gone to research conferences, seen other therapists in action, and also read some really cool books by awesome people like Sue Johnson or John Gottman, Julie Gottman. Something that stood out to me a lot is that different theories, different philosophers, different therapists sometimes talk about the same thing just with different words and different assumptions. I've heard people talk about emotions as this dance. There's an emotional dance in relationships. Be able to hear and sing the music, dance to the music together, which I think is really beautiful, but my brain also works on analogies. So, and I love dance, so I get excited about that. I've also heard people kind of more define emotions as secondary and primary emotions, so it's split up into different categories. Basically, one is saying this is the initial emotion that you feel, And then there's an emotion that's underneath that. That's kind of the bigger picture, the more sensitive part that's coming up.
Like almost the why of why you're feeling it?
Yeah, almost the why of the initial feeling that you have. Honestly, full disclosure, I get really confused about which is which because
well, we both recollect learning the opposite of what we found on the internet.
Yeah.
But the whole internet seems to have a consensus, but then we're pretty sure that's not what we were taught in our classes. So I don't know. We don't know.
Whoops. I feel like I should know that. But something I really love to do with clients is talk about the surface level emotions and then the deeper level emotions. So surface level emotions are your initial reaction. It's what comes up for you when somebody, doesn't show an interest in what you're saying, when they seem distracted as you're talking, or you go to sit by them and have a moment of connection, but they just, there's nothing back. Be curious about the anger, about the frustration, about the tiredness, about all the things, whatever the initial reaction is. Get curious about that. Then ask yourself, what is underneath this for me? And then as you do the deeper dive to understand, what did it make me think about myself? Am I unlovable? And fears and other things there, as well as hopes and dreams and longings that we all have. So just get curious about that and be able to let yourself feel it. That's something that I really like to do.
Yeah, I like that. I found that super useful for me to be like, okay, what am I feeling? And now, why am I feeling it? Because then I can figure out what problem needs to be fixed. Which we'll also talk about.
Oh. and sometimes knowing the what of moving forward, it might not come immediately. And stuff still might be confusing. I've definitely been in those situations before of like, okay, I've identified what I'm feeling. I know how it shows up in my body, and I'm still carrying this grief or this sadness with me. What am I going to do? And so it's okay if it takes longer. You have our permission. Not that you need it, but give yourself permission in the process. Okay, shall we?
Yes. Okay, let's dive into our 5 points. The first one is there are no good or bad emotions. And this goes back to what we talked about, the different emotion philosophies. Often the emotions are classified based on positive or negative, or pro-social versus anti-social, or good and bad emotions, which can be useful for classification, but it is also pretty damaging because it says, these are good emotions to feel and these ones are bad emotions to feel. But as we talk about this, I hope you see that you need all of your emotions to live a full life. And not only to have the full human experience, but also emotions are your guides to living a great life.
Okay, I tried to whistle and it didn't work at all. Yeah, no. I love that. That's cool. Emotions are guides to living a full life.
Yeah, and so we kind of have this attitude of like, happiness is a good emotion and sadness and anger are bad emotions. But that's like not true, because happiness can be a bad emotion. I mean, have you ever seen someone have joy at someone else's pain? The playground bully.
Yeah, there are, or throughout history, people who took pleasure in hurting others.
Right.
Being the cause of pain, which is really, really sad to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what happened in your life to get you to that place? And also, again, we're accountable for our actions.
And then anger is normally labeled as a bad emotion, but isn't it good to feel anger if someone is trying to rob you or attack your children or something. Like their anger
or abusing you.
Yeah, like it's good to feel anger, or fear is often seen as a bad emotion, but you need to be scared if that cougar is in front of you so that you have the energy and the focus to run away, right? And so there are no good or bad emotions, they just all are. They're all just emotions, right? And there's emotions, well, when we say, oh, these ones are good, those ones are bad, then one of the things that makes the emotions bad is when we get them, we say, oh, I'm not supposed to feel that. Ooh. And so it almost makes it worse, if that makes sense. It's like, I'm not supposed to feel that, and it's an uncomfortable emotion, and so then you double don't want to feel that emotion.
It adds to all of it.
Yeah.
Research shows, to back that up, research shows that when we move into that place of, no, I can't feel that, or I shouldn't be doing this, and it's the shoulds and the I mustn't, like, that adds a lot more mental stress, and it adds a lot more of a mental load to us, and then it makes you more likely to have those thoughts or to experience distress with those feelings.
And as you try and push thoughts away, they're more likely to come back to you. And as you try and push emotions away, the more you push them away, the more they come back to you more fiercely.
And that's why mindfulness and acceptance can be really, really powerful. Because you're letting your thoughts come and go, and you're getting curious about it.
Yeah.
Instead of being judgmental, which being judgmental and being curious cannot exist at the same time. Because curiosity is very much...
it's open-mindedness.
Yes. Yeah. While judgment comes from a place of, I don't understand this, I don't like it, or I'm critical of this or you or that thing.
It's a narrow focus.
Yeah, it's more of a narrow focus, and also it's kind of, and I'm not dismissing getting into a judgmental place. Like, we all have our opinions and our beliefs. I just want to say, in my own experiences, when I am being judgmental, my heart is harder. When I'm curious, I feel more at peace. I also feel more receptive to the world and people around me. Yeah. I'd rather be curious than judgmental. I still have my moments. and I always will, and that's okay.
And it's important to differentiate between, like, there's good judgment and there's bad judgment. In, like,
that's fair.
As humans, we're always judging things, but when it comes from a place of narrow-mindedness is different from coming from a place of discernment and trying to figure out what's going on.
That's a good clarification. Yeah, because judgments can keep us alive.
And we have the same word for kind of two different ideas, so it's kind of confusing. I think it's mostly our language.
So judgment, maybe we use for the, like, harder heart. Or the criticism, right? But then discernment is no, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, so I guess discern instead of judging is a way that you could say it. Yeah.
Discern instead of judge, friends.
I like that.
That's good.
So we talked about there's no good or bad emotions.
They just are.
Yeah, they just are.
Yeah.
And no emotion is better than another emotion, because often we're like, oh, happiness is the best emotion to feel, and so we want to feel that a lot. But we need all of our emotions, once again, to live a full life and to guide us to the best life that we can live.
Absolutely. I also think that, and I'm gonna get on a soapbox and then we'll keep going. I also think that the people who are in tune with their emotions and they're honest about it are the type of people who feel so authentic and real to me. And I love being around people like that. On one hand, it's because I feel like they give me the permission to be more of myself.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it's just refreshing, because so often we try and hide our emotions, or it's like, what does this say about me if I show this frustration or this hurt? because we're not sure how people will handle it. And so there's a time and a place and a more appropriate audience to share our feelings. So you be the best judge of that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if you're sharing how you're feeling, people won't really care. And that sucks. Like, I hate being on that side. I hate that feeling because it's isolating. And it is beautiful when you find the people who see you for what you can offer, and they also can hold space for your emotions too. So find your people.
Find your people. I like that. One of the reasons that we feel like there's good and bad emotions, one of the things is what the author of this book, Curlin McLaren, calls emotional attribution errors.
Fun stuff.
Yes. And she points out that emotions don't cause problems, they rise to help deal with problems. So a lot of the time it can be like, oh, I'm feeling sad right now, so that's the problem. When no, the actual problem is you just had a loved one die, and that's why you're feeling sad. And so the root problem is not your sadness. We don't need to get rid of that sadness necessarily. The root problem is that you have a loss in your life, right? And like, how often when someone has a loss in their life, they lost a loved one or they had a breakup, are we like, oh, they're probably really sad, we need to comfort them? And I feel like a lot of the time that can be or turns into, we need to get rid of their sadness,
cover it up.
Yeah. Instead of being really real about the problem, being like, yeah, this happened to you and it's terrible, and that person cannot come back, and let them have their space to mourn, and let sadness do its job of healing and restoring, so that they can get back to a place that they can move on with their life, right? And so when we have this attribution error, when we're like, the problem is that they're sad, rather than the problem is that they had a loss, and how can we help them deal with that loss instead of getting rid of the emotion associated with the loss. So that is the first point, which had a lot of sub-points within it. So there are no good or bad emotions. We evolved to have emotions, so I think they probably have a purpose.
Yeah. Probably.
I think we have them for a reason. And especially that we need all emotions to live a full life and live in a society. I think humans are so emotional because emotions are really important for navigating societies and navigating justice and mercy, and taking care of all of each other and maximizing our chance of survival. So emotions are really important for relationships, and they're one of the things that make us unique because we are so emotional. And let's embrace that instead of thinking it's a bad thing.
Oh, beautiful. Call to action number 1.
Yes.
Okay, so for principle number 2, we want to share, we can feel multiple emotions at once. And by this, we're talking about, I can feel simultaneously a lot of sadness and a lot of peace. Or I could feel a lot of love and a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
Kind of the idea of, I love you a lot, but I don't like you very much right now.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of this in our language, like bittersweet, which we had a whole podcast on.
So good.
And then we have nostalgia, which I feel like bittersweet is more sad, little sweet, and nostalgia is a lot of sweet, little sad. That's kind of how I view it.
Okay, I can see it. Yeah.
And then someone's smiling at someone else's pain. Anger, which is anger and joy. You're angry at that person and you're happy that they're in pain. Anger and joy. Panic and anger often go together. You're really angry that someone's attacking your cat, and you're also panicking because someone's attacking your cat. You can feel, in the book they call it panger, panic and anger, because they often go together. Yeah, panger? That's what she calls it.
That's fun.
And anger and sadness, like an unjust loss, you may feel, I'm really angry and I feel really sad that I have this loss.
Yeah, or being so disadvantaged for your life and consistently not having certain benefits or opportunities because of socioeconomic stuff, like your financial status, or maybe the color of your skin, or like some discrimination of some kind. Like, I think a lot of privilege can show up with the anger and sadness piece as well. Yeah, a lot of people in marginalized groups have a lot of anger and sadness tied together, which is really hard that some people have to live with that. Yeah, I sometimes feel it with type 1 diabetes, like with my autoimmune disease. Feeling a lot of
that
anger.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And sadness and loss. Like, I also think anxiety and hope can exist at the same time.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Cool. Shall we move on to number 3?
Well, I want to point out here that this is feeling multiple emotions at once is kind of a principle of emotional intelligence.
You got it.
Is kind of a principle of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And having, because if you're only ever looking for one emotion, you can miss out on a lot, and seeing where emotions cross over tells you a lot about the situation and what's going on. And there are emotions that tend to travel together. So panic and anger, like we talked about, tend to move together. And anger and sadness, bittersweet's common, right? So there are ones that do tend to go together a lot. Now we can move to point 3.
Yeah, I like that though. We tend to travel together.
Emotions always have something useful to tell you.
Oh yeah, 1,000%.
I think this is so important because in certain subcultures or different areas within America, at least, it's like, oh, you're too emotional, or like, you shouldn't be feeling this. All of that, right?
Yeah, stop being so sensitive.
Right. And I really don't like that, because there's always something useful emotions have. There's always a seed of truth in your emotion, and it's always telling you something about the situation or your life or what you need to work on or all of these things, right? And so there's no I shouldn't feel that. There's no I shouldn't be angry at them, because that's something I hear a lot. It's like, they did this and I know I shouldn't be angry at them, but I'm just having a hard time. It's like, no, it's okay for you to be angry at them and to feel that anger, and you don't want to act out on it in inappropriate ways. And maybe you understand someone's having a hard time, and so you're like, I shouldn't be feeling angry. But that anger tells you something. Like, it's fine to feel that emotion and figure out what that anger is telling you. Is it telling you something about a boundary that's been crossed, or something feels unfair? And so if any emotion you feel, you can look at it and say, what is this emotion telling me? That is so powerful.
I love that.
And that is how it guides us to living a great life, because it tells us what we value, what's going on, and so we can redirect our life to fix things.
Absolutely. And emotions, really, when it comes down to it, they are guides for us. We can use the information they're offering. We can pay attention to how our body's feeling. We can pay attention to what we feel when we're around a certain person. And people talk about, oh, trust your gut. How often do we trust our emotions? How often are we getting curious about our emotions? What is it that your emotions can tell you today? Like, we would encourage you to do that as you're listening to this podcast. what have you felt in the past hour? And what did that tell you? Yeah. Emotions are sources of information. And I think that helps clear up a lot of fear or stigmatization that can come with feelings. And when it really comes down to it, feelings are just feelings. And they're there. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just information.
I'm wondering if we should do some personal examples of this to kind of like, I don't know, I think this point is really important, and maybe we should talk about it a little bit.
I am down.
One, for me, today I felt a little bit of shame or guilt because I came late to the recording again, right? And I could just be like, oh, like, those are bad emotions, I'm pushing them away. But I can look at that and say, okay, why am I feeling shame about this? And I can say, well, it's because I'm late basically every time, and that's not someone I want to be. And I want Brooke to be able to trust that I'm going to get here on time. And so then what do I do about that? What do I do next time so I can make sure I get here on time? And what changes can I make? And so that's directing me. It's saying my shame was telling me I value these things and I want to be honest and trustworthy because those are things that I value. And so I feel that emotion and then I say, what do I do to better live my engaged life, right? Do you have an example?
Yeah, I have two that came to mind, and I'm deciding which one I'd rather share more. Well, since it's our podcast and it's us, I think I want to share my experience last week when we were talking on the phone.
Oh, yeah.
And just like my stuff that came up.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Good. Let's hear it.
Okay. So last week I called Bryn and I let her know that I needed to go out of town and change our schedule for recording because we were supposed to record this last Thursday, but I went to a therapy research conference and I didn't communicate very well about that. And I waited just to figure out some things instead of just immediately when I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to this, telling Bryn. And it impacted her, it impacted the recording schedule, and it caused a lot of stress. And when talking with Bryn about it and hearing her perspective, like I just felt so mad at myself, as well as shame and sadness over not being reliable for someone I respect and I love so much. And also, I don't want to be an inconvenience to people. Like I have a value of I want to help and I want to be the type of person, the type of friend that when people are around me, they feel good. And I show people respect. Like that's another value of mine that I have. And I did not practice my values. I wasn't intentional. And I ended up hurting someone I really cared about and causing some stress and anxiety and my sadness as well as my anger at myself, my frustration, my guilt. Those were flags saying, hey Brooke, pay attention. Learn from this. How can you make amends? How can you repair it and like show empathy? And also how can you treat Bryn better when or / if something like this happens again? Like how can you be more intentional with that? So I took those emotions that came up for me as, oh, it's really uncomfortable right now. And in life there will always be change and stuff will always come up. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And if we just run away from what makes us uncomfortable, whether that's a person or an opportunity or, etc., we're not going to grow as much. And that helped me kind of lean into what I did feel, even though I didn't like it and I felt really bad. And I've done a little bit better.
Yeah, I really like how you navigated that. You were able to identify your emotions you were feeling and then say, what are these telling me about the situation and what I did and what happened, and from there, what can I do to repair that? And I feel like we had a really good conversation, and we straightened things out, and we were able to make it so things will run better in the future. And so that we'll be more open, and it made me really trust you a lot more, because instead of pushing away those emotions so you didn't feel that uncomfiness,
it's uncomfy,
then you embraced the uncomfy, and you were like, how do I navigate things with this? And that led us to having a better relationship.
Thanks, Bryn.
Good job.
Thank you.
I felt like it was a very holistic, good conversation, that I feel like the conflict creates closeness, right?
It's an opportunity for greater understanding and love, and and thank you for what you shared. I really appreciated that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Personal examples.
Yes.
There we go. Okay.
Point number 4. This is one of my favorite things from the book. I think it's just brilliant and totally like revolutionized how I view emotions. McLaren talks about how there are different levels of emotions. And so she says there's soft, medium, and intense. And we actually have different words in our language for each of them. So I'm going to use fear as our example here. So with fear, a soft level fear could be nervous or feeling alert. A medium level fear could be feeling afraid or fearful. And then an intense fear could be petrified, terrified, frenzied. And so there's different levels, and we have words for those different levels. And normally at the soft level, we wouldn't normally call it fear. And on the medium level is where we start calling it fear. And then the intense level is when we start feeling flooded with that emotion. And I think this is so useful because, especially recognizing the soft level emotion, and her example of this is if you are in, when you're somewhere and someone's like, do you hear that? And like the whole group kind of perks up and they're like, what is that? And everyone's like kind of senses turn on.
Yeah, like there's a body response.
Yeah, there's that response. And she says that is low level fear, because fear is all about preparing you to deal with something that's scary, right? It's preparing you to deal with a challenge that you need all of your senses laser focused on. Which I think is such a fascinating way to look at it. And so you have low level fear is just when your like senses are alert. And then because she also talks about how a medium fear can just be when you're really focused on something, or an intense level fear is when you're laser focused on something and all of your senses are in tune and you're all like flowing and really have a good balance and flow with things. And we wouldn't normally call that fear, but she's like, fear is intuition and action. And so the intense level fear of this laser focus is another type of fear, but it's not the same thing that we normally frame fear as.
And something with that is, where does fight, flight, sorry. I'll try that again. Where does fight and flight show up? What about freeze? What about fawn? And like, these are terms for behaviors that come up when we are in a state of fear, or we feel like we're being attacked, and there's a risk of hurt, of pain, a risk of pain. Yeah. And with fear in the soft, medium, and intense levels, I can see like I can see fight and flight coming out. I can also see with the intense fear, like petrified, that very much is the freeze response.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you're just kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't move. Like, what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
And because in nature, animals will play dead and their predator won't want to eat them because they're cold and they won't be as tasty, or maybe they were sick and they don't want to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So we've evolved these things to help us survive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They serve a purpose.
Yeah. They all have a purpose, and if you're hunting, you have that alert. You're paying attention to the animals around you and trying to find them, right? But when a bear attacks you, then you're petrified or you're laser focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sports are actually a good example of this. That laser focus that athletes have when they're really their head's really in the game. Like that's really like, I think that's very comparable to like a bear is attacking you and you are dealing with that situation.
It's so interesting, like the brain and the nervous system.
Yeah.
Because our bodies and our emotions can prepare us to act, to keep us alive or to help us perform well.
Yeah.
Whether that's running from a bear for our lives, or it's to give our best effort in a sport that we love, that we've trained really hard for. And it just kind of is like it's just what our bodies and our brains and our emotions do to help us stay alive and hopefully be healthy.
Yeah, and that brings up a point that I think is really interesting, that emotions prepare our energies for something. And so fear makes us really alert, right? And it makes it so we can respond to something scary. So it changes our energy. And anger, you know, when you feel really angry and it flows through you, like I feel like I feel anger so strongly. When you feel that, it's preparing you to set a boundary or protect yourself or whatever you need to do. But then sadness, especially situational depression, which is different than clinical depression, situational depression, it's saying we're dropping your energy so that you have almost no energy because something is not working right now and you need to stop. Situational depression is kind of a stop sign saying we need to figure something else out. This is not working before we hurt ourselves. Because we're doing too much. But then happiness is saying we don't need a ton of energy right now, but what we're doing, we don't need as much energy as we might need for anger, but what we're doing right now is working. And so it gives you that energy, kind of that pep to continue doing what is working for you. It's so fascinating how the emotions alter our energy so that we can deal with the situation we have.
Yeah.
See, I look at this and I'm like, why would anyone think that emotions are good or bad? Like, we need all of them to deal with things.
Yeah. One isn't necessarily better than the other. Like, they just are. And sure, it sounds nicer to be happy all the time. Like, and you can't have just happiness. Like there's so much more to life. Yes, I really love that. And especially anger is kind of ostracized. Oh, it's definitely seen as the bad emotion. And I shared this with you when we were planning it, and I'll summarize what we were talking about so we can do our last point. So in a clinical setting, like in a therapy setting, I came across papers someone had left in their office.
This made me so angry.
And the stack of papers this person had left in their therapy office, it had a list of all the emotions and definitions and like, yeah, here's what this offers you. And then I was so curious because we were prepping for this episode, and I went to the anger one. I was like, I wonder what it says. And the first thing I read was anger is a selfish emotion.
Didn't it say completely selfish?
Yes. Yes, it did. It is a completely selfish emotion. It doesn't serve any purpose. And I'm reading it. I'm like, no. Anger has something there that can teach us, whether that's, oh, we've been hurt, a boundary has been crossed. Like we've talked about it. I won't.
It's so that is so wild to me, because I feel like that's such, from my perspective at least, a deep misunderstanding of anger, because it's like anger protects you, and yeah, anger can be used to do really terrible things, but can also be used to protect people.
Yeah.
It protects people from the people using anger to do bad things.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So anyway, it's fine. Well, yeah, let big deep breaths. Just in, using your diaphragm, and then
it's okay.
Inner peace. So
I want to hit this one.
Oh yeah.
Thing too. Something brilliant about the soft, medium, and intense levels of emotions is McLaren points out that if you deal with your emotions at the soft level, then you can kind of prevent how often they go to the medium or intense level. And an example of this is I experienced this where my husband had been doing something that kind of had been annoying me for a while, but I was like, it's just annoying me, so I'm not gonna like bring it up. It was that soft level. I was just getting annoyed. Soft anger. But then he did it in a more volatile situation, and suddenly I just was like, I did not deal with it or set the boundary as calmly as I would have liked to. And then at the end I was like, man, if I had just addressed this when it had annoyed me, then I wouldn't have had to get really angry. I wouldn't have had to go to that intense level of that emotion and deal with it in a not very healthy way.
Interesting.
And I think that's so useful for relationships, paying attention and saying, am I annoyed right now? And I think maybe it happens once. Like, you don't have to point everything out all the time, but if it's something that is recurring, maybe it's something that you need to bring up, right? And so if you can pay attention to those soft level emotions, maybe you're a little bit sad by something. Ask yourself why you're sad, so you don't have to be really sad by something later.
Yeah. It's like the step by step, a little bit at a time. And by taking care of the soft level,
right,
maybe we can help there not be an intense level. And then an explosion. And then, which is so normal. And thank you for sharing that. Like, hey, the other story I was thinking about sharing relates a lot to that.
Oh, really?
It was just like a funny little thing, but it meant something. And yeah, so I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
Good job. That's awesome.
Now I feel like I can navigate it better. So, or like when I was on a backpacking trip and I kept having like low level fear or anxiety about things, like I'm kind of nervous, like there's not a lot of there's no grizzly bears in Utah, but we were in Wyoming where there are grizzly bears. Ooh. And they're like still pretty uncommon, but like I kind of have I've heard stories and I know it's very, very unlikely to happen, but I'm always like still a little nervous. And so I kept having this low level fear about it.
That's something that protects you.
Yeah.
Like if something was to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I have this low level fear where I was like, I'm feeling a little bit stressed about this. And so then I was able to talk it through with myself and be like, okay, well, let's choose campsites that aren't going to have as many problems. Let me like kind of reason through this with myself and be like, and I was able to bring up with my husband, like, I'm a little nervous about this. And he was like, I scour the internet. There are like no bear attacks in this area. Like, we're going to be fine. And so I was able to address that like then, instead of like in the middle of the night when I'm hearing stuff outside of my tent being terrified. Right.
Yep.
And so I was able to regulate my emotions better because I navigated it at a low level rather than when it got to a more scary level.
Oh, Brent, that's so cool. I really appreciate the example too, because that's easy to understand. If I was in a place where bears were more likely, I would feel really nervous and scared about that too. And something that you touched on that I want to go into really quick is the principle of flooding. This is something that John and Julie Gottman have researched a lot.
Okay.
In the therapeutic world. Flooding is what happens when there's a physiological response in your body. Like your body, your heart starts beating faster, maybe you have sweaty palms, and your body is getting ready to act. And there's just a bunch of stuff coming up for you, and your emotions are coming to the surface. And typically there is the frustration, the anger, and it's more medium to intense levels of emotions. And when you start to get flooded, first off, just like emotions, it's important to recognize when you're getting flooded. Secondly, it's important to be able to regulate and do some self-soothing or even co-regulation. Like you reached out to your husband.
Yeah.
And he was able to help comfort you and soothe you, and that also validated your feelings. And then it helped you move forward and feel better about it.
Yeah.
So that's just something to be aware of as well, that things can show up in our bodies, not just with our emotions.
Yeah, that is good to know. And that goes back to emotions change your energies because they need to.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. Should we move on to point number 5?
Sweet. Yeah. So our last point that we want to leave y'all with: emotions are our guides to engaged living. Tell us about that, Bren.
Well, we talked about engaged living in our last season, right? And how there's the study on what makes people happiest, and one of the things is engaged living. And I think it's really interesting because emotions are our guides to engaged living because they tell us what we value. But the people that do the most engaged living end up the happiest. And so it may seem counterintuitive, but the more you dive in and explore and listen to those quote unquote negative emotions, the more you're actually probably going to feel happy because you're living an engaged life.
Yeah. You're not stuffing it down.
Yeah.
You're honoring your emotions, which in a way is giving compassion to yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And emotions, how are they our guides to engaged living? They're our guides because they, we're going to talk a lot about this in our next episode, but anger guards your sense of self and tells you who you want to be, and it's really good at telling you what you value. What you get angry about tells you a lot about what you care about. And happiness tells you when things are going right, and so it says, yes, you should keep doing these things. Guilt tells you when you're not living aligned to the commitments you've made. And sadness helps you slow down and restore yourself, which allows you to rest, which allows you to later have more energy and regulate and everything. And so the more in tune you are with your emotions, the more you honor them, the more fulfilling a life you can live, and the more you can live a life that you deep down need and want to be living. Which I think is so cool.
Yeah. It's all connected. And that's so beautiful to me too. I love that. Okay.
Next week we are going to talk about the 4 emotion families. So we're going to kind of deep dive into, okay, we talked about this. What does that look like for each of the emotion families? And so I just want to let you guys know that, so that these things that we learned, you can take into our next episode, and we're going to talk more about how to navigate everything, which I think will be, I think that's going to be a pretty awesome episode.
I think so too. We're really excited. It's going to be so fun to talk about with you. And yeah, let's recap.
Okay. So the book for this that we got a lot of this from is The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. It's great. Look in the show notes for the chapters I recommend. And we started by talking about why do we even need to talk about emotions, and it's because we don't really get an emotional education, and a lot of people nowadays are being taught to identify their emotions, but not what to do with them.
Yeah, like what do you do with the emotions you identify?
Right.
Yeah, what's next?
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't even taught to identify their emotions, so...
or be okay slowing down. Because there are some people who just get in their heads and they're like, nope, I don't want to do feelings.
Right.
For some reason or another.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just if you have very little emotional skill just because of how you're raised, it can be very difficult to navigate that. It can be really stressful, and it's like trying to learn a language as an adult. Like, it's much easier as a child, I feel like, and learning the language of emotions as an adult rather than as a child can be really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went through the 5 key points on rethinking of emotions. Number 1, there are no good or bad emotions.
Mm-hmm.
We need all of them. We evolved to have them. We need all of them to live a full life and even live in a society.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second point too, it goes right with that. We can feel multiple emotions at once. Mm-hmm. And again, none of those are good or bad. It's just part of living life, being a human being, right?
We can feel more than one, and that's important for emotional intelligence. And then emotions always have something useful to tell you. So that there's not, I shouldn't be feeling that. It's like, no, the fact that this emotion showed up shows that there's something going on and your emotion is trying to tell you something. And how can you honor that emotion and figure out what that emotion needs from you?
And here's a key point with that. And I've seen this in my own life and in my clients' lives. If we get in our heads and we're just trying to explain or make sense of whatever happened, we're not addressing the feelings. And it's not until we let ourselves feel, to sit with that, that we're really going to move forward and be okay.
Yeah. Sometimes we can be too caught up in trying to navigate what's going on that we don't ask what we feel, and what we feel can actually tell us what's going on pretty well.
Yeah. The irony.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll just keep looking. We'll keep trying to make sense of things in our head.
Yeah.
If we don't ever acknowledge the emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sit with that. Yeah. And then there are different levels of emotions, which is really cool to read about. Yeah, it's really cool. Soft, medium, and intense, and it can show up in different ways, whether it's with a person or nature or a future thing or...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really so useful and fascinating. And then number 5, emotions are guides to engaged living. So you need all of them and to honor them to live the best life you can, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the support. Thanks for being cool.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We really do appreciate all of you. And truly, we just hope that this podcast is helpful.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening and have an amazing day.
Goodbye.
Bye.